My husband called me useless at dinner with his colleagues while I was secretly paying off his $120,000 debt. He thought I would crumble, thought I'd beg for his validation. Instead, I showed him exactly how useless I truly was when I stopped. Managing his finances, stopped fixing his mistakes, stopped carrying his burdens, and when his carefully crafted image began to collapse around him, when the truth of his situation finally surfaced, his face, when I walked away with my freedom and success, was worth every moment of disrespect I had endured. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal glasses clinked around the table as Travis raised his drink in a toast. I sat quietly beside him, the weight of the day still heavy on my shoulders after 8 hours at the office, followed by 3 hours reviewing his financial statements. The restaurant buzzed with the kind of energy that came with expensive meals and important conversations. 6 of his colleagues from the investment firm sat around us, their spouses nodding politely as Travis commanded the room. "To closing the Richardson account," he announced, his voice carrying that practiced confidence that had once made my heart flutter. Now it just reminded me of all the payments I'd made to his voice coach, another expense on the credit card. I was systematically paying down. "Couldn't have done it without the team," said Marcus, Travis's boss, with a nod in his direction. Travis laughed, the sound practiced and perfect. "Well, some of us pull more weight than others," he said, his eyes sliding toward me for just a moment. Speaking of which, I tensed, recognizing the shift in his tone. My fingers curled around the stem of my wine glass, still full because someone needed to drive home sober tonight. It would be me. It was always me. "Laura here," Travis continued, his hand landing on my shoulder with a weight that felt possessive rather than affectionate, "has been trying to understand what I actually do for a living for 7 years now." A ripple of polite laughter circled the table. I managed a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach my eyes. "I keep telling her that managing household expenses isn't quite the same as managing million-dollar portfolios," he added, squeezing my shoulder a little too firmly. "But she keeps those receipts organized in her little spreadsheets." More laughter, slightly uncomfortable now. I noticed Diane, Marcus's wife, shifting in her seat, her eyes darting to mine with something like sympathy. "It's cute, really," Travis continued, the alcohol making him bolder, crueler. "She thinks balancing the checkbook is the same as what we do. Completely useless when it comes to actual finance, but at least she tries." The table fell silent. The word hung in the air between us. Useless. I should have been used to it by now. The dismissive comments, the belittling jokes, the way he minimized everything I did. But something about this moment. Perhaps it was the spreadsheet I'd been reviewing earlier that showed I'd paid off $87,000 of his pre-marriage debt already. Or perhaps it was the notification I'd received that morning about being shortlisted for the financial director position at my company. Something made this time different. I placed my napkin on the table and excused myself, walking to the restroom. With measured steps that betrayed none of the earthquake happening inside me. In the stark fluorescent light, I stared at my reflection. A woman I barely recognized anymore. Professional attire carefully selected to impress his colleagues. Hair styled the way he preferred. Expression trained to reveal nothing. Behind that, mask was the truth. I had been systematically paying off the mountain of debt Travis had brought into our marriage. Student loans from his MBA, credit card debt from living beyond his means, even gambling debts he thought I didn't know about. All while maintaining my own career, managing our home, and propping up the illusion of his perfect life. The irony wasn't lost on me. He worked at an investment firm, projecting financial expertise to the world, while secretly drowning in debt. That I, the useless one, was silently resolving. Each month, I allocated my salary strategically, paying down his highest interest debts first, negotiating with creditors, creating payment plans, all behind his back, because Travis couldn't stand the idea that he wasn't the financial genius he pretended to be. He didn't know I could see through his facade, the late-night panic attacks when statements arrived, the way he'd hide bills, the calls from collection agencies that he thought I didn't notice, the lies about where money went. I saw it all, and for years I'd been his silent savior, his financial guardian angel. And this was my reward, being called useless in front of people whose respect he craved, whose validation meant everything to him. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to smudge the makeup I'd applied perfectly this morning. As I patted my skin dry, I caught my own gaze in the mirror again, and something shifted. A question formed in my mind, pushing through the hurt and humiliation. What would happen if I stopped? Not just stopped paying his debts, stopped everything, stopped managing his life, stopped covering for his mistakes, stopped being the foundation upon which he'd built his house of cards. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time in years, I saw a different possibility. A life where I wasn't defined by what I did for Travis, where my worth wasn't measured by his approval. I reapplied my lipstick with steady hands, the routine motion at odds with the revolution happening in my mind. By the time I returned to the table, something fundamental had changed. Travis was mid-story, gesturing with his fourth whiskey of the night, completely oblivious to the transformation that had occurred in his absence. I smiled, not the tight, practiced smile of before, but something new. Something that belonged to me alone. "Everything okay?" Diane whispered when Travis was distracted. "Yes," I said, and meant it. "Everything is about to be." I sat through the rest of dinner in a strange state of detachment, observing Travis as if from a great distance, the way he interrupted others, the slight meanness that edged his jokes, the performance he put on, so desperate for approval, so terrified of being exposed as less than he claimed to be. For 7 years, I had been the stage manager of this production, ensuring everything ran smoothly while he took all the applause. I had maintained the illusion of his success while quietly cleaning up his messes. I had absorbed his criticism, his dismissal, his casual cruelty because I believed that's what love meant: sacrifice, support, selflessness. But as I watched him now, the word useless still echoing in my ears, I realized with perfect clarity, love shouldn't require erasing yourself. Support shouldn't mean subjugation. And the person who called you useless while you carried their burdens didn't deserve another moment of your sacrifice. When we arrived home that night, Travis stumbled slightly as he removed his tie, the evening's drinks making his movements clumsy. He kicked off his expensive shoes, leaving them in the middle of the hallway for me to trip over in the morning, as always. "Successful night," he mumbled, already headed for bed without checking if I was following. I stood in the darkened living room, not switching on the lights. In the shadows, I could see the outlines of the life we'd built, the furniture I'd selected, the photos I'd framed, the order I'd created. All of it designed to support his image, his comfort, his needs. Tomorrow, things would begin to change. Not dramatically, not in ways he'd immediately notice. But slowly, deliberately, I would start showing Travis exactly how useless I could be. And when he finally realized what he'd lost, when the house of cards collapsed without my hands to hold it steady, I wouldn't be there to witness it. I'd be too busy building something new, something mine. The morning routine was a dance I had choreographed years ago, each step so familiar I could perform it half asleep. And I often did. 30 a.m. Wake up before Travis, shower quickly. 45 a.m. Start coffee. Prepare Travis's protein shake with the expensive supplement he insisted was an investment in his professional image. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Review the day's schedule. Set. Out Travis's medication for his high blood pressure, a condition he hid from his colleagues, who still saw him as the invincible rising star. 15 Bam. Iron Travis's shirt, always cotton, never synthetic, steamed exactly how he liked it. 30 Wake Travis with his first coffee. Weather the inevitable complaints about something. The temperature, the strength, my slamming around in the bathroom earlier. Make breakfast while Travis showered. Remind him of his 9 a.m. meeting. Listen to him tell me about the meeting. As if I hadn't been the one to remind him. Clean up breakfast dishes while Travis finished getting ready. Pack his lunch. A task he found demeaning, but eating out daily was an expense we couldn't afford, though I never said that aloud. Word AM. Hand Travis his keys, wallet, phone, medication, and briefcase at the door. Receive the perfunctory kiss that felt more like a period at the end of a sentence than an expression of affection. AM. Begin my own preparations for work, compressed into half the time I'd given him. This particular morning, I stood at the kitchen counter measuring coffee grounds, my mind still lingering on last night's dinner. Useless. The word clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. But something else clung too. That moment of clarity in the restaurant bathroom. The question that had planted itself in my mind. What would happen if I stopped? Travis's alarm blared from the bedroom, the third one he'd set. He always snoozed through the first two, a habit that had once seemed endearing, but now felt like yet another way I carried his responsibilities. My hand hesitated over the coffee. Maker. What would happen if I didn't make his coffee this morning? If I didn't set out his pills? If I didn't iron his shirt or pack his lunch or remind him of his schedule? The possibilities unfurled before me, both terrifying and exhilarating. Laura. Travis's voice, rough with sleep and impatience, broke through my thoughts. Is the coffee ready? Habit took over. Coming, I called back, pressing the button on the machine. Not today, then, but soon. I watched Travis as he moved through the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with one hand while reaching for the mug I'd prepared with the other. He didn't look at me once. Remember you have dinner with the Prestons tonight, I said, referring to his boss's monthly dinner party, another networking opportunity Travis couldn't afford to miss. He grunted in acknowledgement, as if the information was trivial despite having forgotten the last 2 times. And the mortgage payment cleared yesterday, I added, not mentioning that I'd had to transfer funds from my personal savings to cover it after Travis had borrowed from our joint account for a golf outing with clients. That's what autopay is for, he muttered, still not looking up from his phone. I bit back the response that there was nothing auto about the careful financial ballet I performed each month, juggling bills, minimum payments, and escalating interest. Rates. Instead, I packed his lunch in silence. Don't forget to pick up my dry cleaning, he said, finally glancing at me as he gathered his things. I need the blue suit for tomorrow's presentation. I nodded, adding it to my mental list. Work 8 hours at the financial consulting firm where I was being considered for promotion, grocery shopping during lunch break, dry cleaning after work, prepare dinner for when Travis got home, review the refinancing options for his largest credit card debt, and somewhere in there, finish the presentation for my own meeting tomorrow. Travis paused at the door, his expression softening slightly. You look tired, he said, an observation rather than a concern. I was up late reviewing our finances, I replied, a small test, to see if he'd ask for details. He didn't. Well, get some rest. I need you functional. He leaned in for the routine kiss, then was gone, the door closing behind him with definitive finality. I need you functional. Not, I care about your well-being, or, your health matters to me. Just another item on his requirement list. A functional wife, like a functional car or a functional credit card. At work, I moved through my day with the same efficiency I applied to everything. My colleagues respected me, a fact that sometimes startled me given how little respect I received at home. When I spoke in meetings, people actually listened. When I offered analysis, it was valued, not dismissed as cute or domestic. "Laura, these projections are excellent," my supervisor, Marlene, said as we prepared for a client meeting. "The way you've identified potential tax liabilities ahead of time. This is exactly why we're considering you for the director position." I smiled, accepting the praise with a simple, "Thank you," while inside, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Travis whispered, "They're just being nice. They don't really think you're qualified." During my lunch break, I didn't go shopping as planned. Instead, I sat in my office with the door closed, creating a new spreadsheet. Not for Travis's debts this time, but for myself. I titled it Exit Strategy. Column by column, I mapped out what freedom would look like: my income, my expenses without Travis, potential housing options, a timeline for disentangling our finances. The numbers were clear. I could support myself easily. In fact, without Travis's debt payments dragging us down, I would actually have more disposable income on my own. The revelation wasn't surprising. I was a financial analyst after all. But seeing it laid out so clearly was still shocking. For years, Travis had cultivated the narrative that his income was essential, that his career was the priority, that his financial expertise was what kept us afloat. And I had allowed that fiction to persist, even as I quietly managed the reality behind the scenes. I saved the spreadsheet in a password-protected folder and closed my laptop just as Marlene knocked on my door. "Laura, got a minute? I want to discuss the director position timeline. The board is very interested in your candidacy." As I followed her to the conference room, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet certainty taking root. The woman Travis belittled at home was respected and valued here. The financial skills he dismissed as cute spreadsheets were precisely what had caught the attention of senior leadership. I wasn't useless. I was, in fact, exactly what our household needed, and what he took for granted. That evening, I picked up Travis's dry cleaning as requested. I prepared dinner. I reminded him about the Preston's dinner party. I performed all the expected steps of our routine dance, but inside, I was already dancing to a different rhythm, one that would eventually lead me right out the door. The Preston's dinner party was exactly like all the others, a carefully orchestrated display of success and ambition disguised as casual socializing. The women gathered in the kitchen while the men talked business in the living room, a division that always felt like stepping back in time. "Laura, how do you manage it all?" asked Bethany Preston as she arranged canapes on a silver platter. "Travis's career seems so demanding, and yet your home always looks perfect whenever we visit." I smiled the smile I'd perfected, pleasant, modest, revealing nothing. "Oh, it's just organization," I said, the standard response that neither invited. Further questions nor revealed the truth, that I managed it all because Travis managed almost nothing. "Well, it's impressive," said Diane, Marcus's wife, giving me a knowing look that made me wonder if she saw more than she let on. "Especially with your own career. Travis mentioned you work in finance, too?" "Financial consulting," I clarified, noting how Travis had minimized my career again. "I'm actually being considered for a director position." The women's expressions shifted: surprise, respect, and something like curiosity. In these circles, wives with serious careers were still something of an anomaly. "That's wonderful," said Bethany with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "You should tell the men. Marcus is always looking for financial expertise for the firm's personal investments." The suggestion that my professional skills might be valuable, to the very men who laughed at Travis's jokes about my little spreadsheets, created a strange disconnect. Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Travis appeared. "Ladies, you're missing all the action," he announced, his eyes finding me immediately. "Laura, can you fix Marcus another drink? He likes that special way you make the old-fashioned. Not, Laura is being considered for a director position at her firm and might have valuable insights for your investment strategy. Just, Laura, become a bartender now. I made the drink, measuring the bourbon with precision, adding the sugar cube, bitters, and orange peel in the exact proportions Marcus preferred. As I worked, I overheard Travis in the living room. Banking these days is all about relationships, he was saying, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when establishing expertise. The Richardson account came through because I understand how to manage client expectations. What Travis didn't mention was that I had stayed up until 2 a.m. the previous week reviewing his presentation for the Richardson account, correcting calculation errors that would have been devastating if discovered, or that I had drafted talking points addressing their specific tax concerns Travis hadn't even identified until I pointed them out. I delivered the drink to Marcus with a smile, then lingered at the edge of the men's conversation, invisible, yet present. The key is leverage, Travis continued, accepting approving nods from his colleagues, knowing when to push and when to consolidate. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Travis, who had consolidated 3 credit cards last year after maxing them all out, who had leveraged our home equity to pay off gambling debts he thought I didn't know about, was dispensing financial wisdom to men who trusted his professional persona. And I had enabled it all. Every time I quietly fixed his mistakes, every time I paid another bill he forgot about, every time I dipped into my own savings to keep his financial house of cards from collapsing. The weight of this realization settled heavily on my shoulders as I excused myself to use the restroom. In the pristine guest bathroom of the Prestons' home, I stared at my reflection under the expensive lighting that made everyone look their best. What did they see when they looked at me? Travis's capable wife? The woman who made the perfect old-fashioned? The background character in Travis's story of success? What they didn't see was the woman who had systematically paid down $87,000 of Travis's pre-marriage debt while he continued to accumulate more. They didn't see the financial strategist who managed 2 full-time jobs, her own career and the invisible work of keeping Travis afloat. They didn't see that without me, Travis's carefully constructed image would crumble within months. As I rejoined the party, I observed the dynamics with new clarity. The wives who deferred to their husbands, the husbands who expected it. The subtle ways value was assigned. Men's work was important, central, worthy of discussion. Women's work was peripheral, supportive, taken for granted. But I also noticed something else. Diane's quick intelligence whenever the conversation turned to politics. Bethany's strategic thinking when discussing their children's education. The competence and capability that simmered just below the surface of these women's pleasant exteriors. Were their marriages like mine? Did they also carry invisible burdens? Did they lie awake at night wondering if their sacrifices were investments in a shared future or payments into a bottomless pit? The drive home was quiet. Travis too busy checking emails on his phone to make conversation. When he finally spoke, it was to critique. "You were quiet tonight," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Marcus's wife asked me if you were feeling all right." "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. "Just tired." "Well, try to be more engaged next time. These events matter for my career." I didn't respond, but a question formed in my mind. When was the last time Travis had asked about my career? Had he ever inquired about my day beyond whether I'd completed the tasks relevant to his needs? At home, Travis headed straight for the shower while I checked our mailbox. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a letter from my firm. I opened it with steady hands, already suspecting its contents. "We are pleased to formally offer you the position of financial director." The salary listed was nearly double my current one. More than enough to support myself comfortably. More than Travis made, though he didn't know I knew the exact figure. One of many secrets between us. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my work bag instead of sharing the news. Once, I would have rushed to tell him, seeking his approval, his validation. Now I recognize this victory as mine alone. Later, as Travis slept beside me, I updated my exit strategy spreadsheet with the new salary information. The timeline I had projected for financial independence suddenly accelerated. What had seemed like a distant possibility now appeared immediate, tangible. I could leave now, today, tomorrow. The numbers confirmed what my heart already knew. I didn't need Travis. I never had. It was Travis who needed me. My income, my financial management, my endless support of his facade. And he didn't even know it. The imbalance between what I gave and what I received had always been stark. But seeing it laid out in columns and rows, quantified and calculated, made it impossible to ignore any longer. Travis stirred beside me, murmuring something in his sleep. I closed my laptop, the blue light fading to darkness. In that darkness, a decision crystallized. I wouldn't leave, not yet. First, I would show Travis exactly what useless looked like. And then, when he finally understood what he had lost, I would be gone. 2 weeks after receiving my promotion offer, I sat in our home office reviewing the monthly bills. Travis was out with clients. Another dinner he'd assured me was essential for networking, despite our tightening budget. I had stopped arguing about these expenses months ago, recognizing the futility of challenging his professional priorities. The stack of envelopes beside me told a familiar story. Credit card statements with climbing balances, investment account, notices showing mediocre returns, and a past due notice for Travis's car payment that had somehow been overlooked in our mail pile. I sighed, reaching for my checkbook to cover the car payment before it affected his credit score. My pen hovered over the paper as a new thought surfaced. Why was I still protecting him from the consequences of his actions? The front door slammed, followed by the sound of keys hitting the entry table. Travis was home early. Laura? His voice, carried down the hallway, tinged with an unfamiliar urgency. I closed the checkbook and turned as he appeared in the doorway, his expression tense. Something had happened. Where's the Wells Fargo statement from last month? He asked without preamble, loosening his tie with jerky movements. In the filing cabinet, I answered, watching him carefully. Third drawer, under banking. Why? He didn't respond, moving to the cabinet and yanking open the drawer with enough force to make the metal groan. His fingers rifled through the hanging folders, pulling out papers haphazardly. Is everything okay? I asked, though I already sensed. It wasn't. Fine, he snapped, continuing his search. Just need to check something. I watched as he located the statement, scanning it with increasing agitation. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, despite the cool temperature of the room. Travis, I said more firmly, what's going on? He looked up, seeming to really see me for the first time since entering. Something in his expression shifted, calculation replacing panic. Nothing serious, he said, his tone deliberately casual now. Just a discrepancy at work. Marcus asked. About some investment allocations, and I need to double-check my records. The lie hung between us, so transparent I almost pitied him. After 7 years of marriage, I recognized every variation of Travis's deception. The too casual tone, the averted gaze, the subtle repositioning of his body to block my view of the statement. Which allocations? I asked, knowing he didn't expect me to press for details. His hesitation was brief, but telling. The Anderson portfolio, just routine verification. Another lie. We had no accounts or clients named Anderson. I see, I said, turning back to the bills on my desk. Let me know if you need anything else. Relief crossed his features at my apparent acceptance. He refolded the statement and returned it to the folder, his movements more controlled now. I'm going to take a shower, he announced, already heading for the door. Travis, I called after him, making a split-second decision. Did you know your car payment is past due? He froze, turning slowly. What do you mean? That's on autopay. Apparently not, I replied, holding up the notice. It's 15 days late. The payment needs to be made by tomorrow to avoid a credit report. His expression darkened. Why didn't you mention this sooner? The question landed like a physical blow, stunning in its audacity. Why hadn't I mentioned his missed payment sooner? I just opened it, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the heat rising in my chest. Well, take care of it, will you? He said, already dismissing the problem, and me. Use the joint account. The joint account is empty, I stated flatly. This caught his attention. What do you mean empty? I deposited my paycheck last week. Yes, and then you withdrew $800 for your golf weekend. The mortgage cleared yesterday, and that was the remainder. He stared at me, genuine confusion on his face. But you always make sure there's enough in there. Those 7 words crystallized everything wrong with our marriage. You always make sure there's enough in there. Not through some magical financial alchemy, but by transferring my own money into our joint account whenever Travis's spending exceeded his income, which was nearly every month. I guess I missed it this time, I said, watching realization dawn on his face. Well, use your account then, he said, the words less a request than a command. Just make sure it gets paid. And there it was. The fundamental imbalance laid bare. My money was our money, available to cover his shortfalls without question or gratitude. His money was also our money, but primarily allocated to his priorities, his image, his desires. Actually, I said, the word emerging with unexpected steadiness, I think you should handle this one. Travis blinked, momentarily speechless. In 7 years, I had never refused to manage a financial crisis, no matter whose fault it was. What are you talking about? He finally managed. I'm saying I won't be covering your car payment this time. His face flushed. It's our car payment, Laura. Our finances. Is it? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. The car is in your name. You drive it. You chose it. Against my advice about the high interest rate, if you recall. This isn't the time for a financial lecture, he snapped. Just transfer the money? No. The word hung between us, small but immovable. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I had set a boundary and refused to cross it myself. Travis's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, calculation. He softened his approach, moving back toward me. Laura, he said, his voice taking on the cajoling tone he used with difficult clients. I know you're tired. You've been working hard. But this needs to be handled tonight. Yes, it does, I agreed. By you. His facade cracked. For God's sake, what's gotten into you? Just make the damn payment. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Not the man I had married, not the partner I had believed in, but someone who viewed me as a resource to be depleted, a problem solver whose own needs were irrelevant. No, I repeated, standing to gather my papers. I'm going to bed. You might want to call the bank's customer service line. They're open until midnight. As I moved toward the door, Travis grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in just enough to ensure I couldn't easily pull away. You're being ridiculous, he hissed. This affects your credit too. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me, discomfort flickering across his features. Actually, I said, it doesn't. The car loan is solely in your name. I was never added as a co-borrower. His eyes narrowed. How convenient for you to remember that detail now. I remember all the details, Travis, I replied, my voice soft but clear. Every loan, every account, every transfer I've made from my savings to cover your spending, every credit card I've paid down while you continued to live beyond our means. His expression shifted from anger to wariness. What are you talking about? But I was already walking away, a strange lightness in my step. Check your credit report sometime, I called over my shoulder. You might be surprised by how much progress I've made on your behalf. That night, lying in bed beside a husband who radiated resentment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the quiet certainty that comes with finally acknowledging truth. Travis's harsh whisper cut through the darkness. I don't know what game you're playing, but it stops now. I didn't answer, didn't need to. This wasn't a game, it was an awakening, and it had only just begun. Morning arrived with the artificial cheerfulness of our programmable lights, gradually brightening to simulate dawn. I had been awake for hours, listening to Travis's breathing beside me, mapping out my next steps with the same meticulous attention I once devoted to managing his financial messes. He stirred, reaching for his phone before his eyes were fully open, the modern equivalent of a smoker grabbing for their first cigarette. I watched as he scrolled, the blue light illuminating the frown that formed as he presumably saw notifications from his bank. I need coffee, he muttered, more to himself than to me, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. I didn't move, didn't offer to make it, didn't maintain the choreography of our morning routine. When Travis returned from the bathroom, he paused at the sight of me still in bed, scrolling through my own phone. Are you sick? He asked, the question containing no actual concern, merely annoyance at the disruption to his schedule. No, I replied simply, not offering any explanation. He waited for me to elaborate, to justify my deviation from the expected script. When I didn't, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I have the Henderson meeting at 9, he said pointedly. Good. Luck with it, I replied, my tone pleasant but detached. Another pause as Travis processed this unexpected response. My blue tie would be best for this client, he finally said, the hint too obvious to miss. Probably, I agreed, making no move to get up and iron it for him. A flash of irritation crossed his features, quickly masked. Fine, I'll wear the gray one. It's already pressed. I nodded, returning my attention to my phone where I was actually reviewing the confirmation email for my new position, including details about my substantial signing bonus. The irony of checking my own financial advancement while Travis grappled with a wrinkled tie wasn't lost on me. The morning progressed with a series of small disruptions to our established pattern. Travis had to make his own coffee, find his own documents, remember his own schedule. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could justify real complaint, just the absence of the invisible support system he had come to take for granted. As he rushed out the door, 15 minutes later than usual, and, visibly flustered, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. I transferred money for the car payment, he said, the words carrying an edge of resentment. From my personal savings. The account I hadn't known existed until this moment. The revelation should have angered me, but instead it only confirmed what I already suspected. Travis had been maintaining separate finances while relying on me to cover our joint expenses. Good, I said evenly. I'm sure your credit score appreciates it. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face for the familiar signs of accommodation, the appeasing smile, the eager-to-please expression that had been my default for years. He found neither. We'll talk about this tonight, he said, the words landing somewhere between a promise and a threat. I nodded once, not committing to the conversation but not refusing it either. Travis left, the door closing behind him with more force than necessary. Only then did I get out of bed, moving through the quiet house with a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, my morning belonged to me alone. I made a single cup of coffee exactly how I preferred it, darker and stronger than Travis liked. I took a long shower without rushing to accommodate anyone else's schedule. I dressed carefully in one of my power suits, the one Travis had once called too aggressive for a support role. Before leaving for work, I opened my laptop and transferred exactly half of our joint account's balance to my personal account. Not all of it. I wasn't looking to punish Travis or leave him stranded. Just my fair share. The portion of our finances that should have been under my control all along. Then I sent a brief email to our mortgage lender, removing my auto payment authorization. Going forward, each of us would be responsible for transferring our portion manually. No more automatic safety net catching Travis's financial missteps. At Dow, work. The contrast between my home life and professional environment was starker than ever. Here, my strategic thinking was valued, my financial expertise sought after. Colleagues stopped by to congratulate me on my promotion. Genuinely happy for my success. "Laura, got a minute?" Marlene asked, popping into my office around noon. "The executive team wants to discuss your transition plan. They're hoping you can start the new role sooner rather than later." As we walked to the conference room, Marlene lowered her voice. "Between us, they're impressed with how you handled the Davidson portfolio. That kind of strategic thinking is exactly why they want you at the director level. The Davidson portfolio, a complex financial restructuring I had, managed for a client with massive debt issues. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had been professionally rewarded for solving the same types of problems Travis created at home. The meeting went well, with senior leadership discussing my new responsibilities, increased compensation package, and the team I would be managing. Throughout, I projected the confidence of someone who knew her worth, the same confidence I had always possessed professionally, but had somehow checked at my own front door. "We're thinking April 1st for the official start date," said Richard, the CEO. "That gives about 3 weeks for transition. Does that work for your schedule?" "Actually," I heard myself say, "I could start sooner if needed. My schedule is quite flexible." No mention of needing to consult with Travis. No hesitation about making a significant life decision independently. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I returned to my office, my phone buzzed, with Travis's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, a small act of independence that would have been unthinkable just days ago. When I checked the message later, his voice carried the controlled anger I had come to recognize as his response to losing control. "Laura, where's the mortgage payment? I just got a notification that it wasn't processed. Call me back immediately." I didn't call back. Instead, I texted a brief explanation. "I've changed the payment structure. You'll need to transfer your half manually now. Instructions in your email." His response was immediate. "What the hell? Change it back. Now." The old Laura would have apologized, would have rushed to fix the problem, would have prioritized Travis's comfort over her own autonomy. That Laura was fading with each boundary I established. "No," I texted back. "This is more equitable." My phone rang again almost instantly. I silenced it, returning to the presentation I was preparing for a new client. Travis's financial crisis was no longer my emergency. By the time I left work, I had 3 more missed calls and a series of increasingly agitated texts. I read them with a clinical detachment, as if reviewing a case study in financial dependency. Rather than messages from my husband, the last one simply read, "We need to talk, tonight." For the first time, I was ready for that conversation. I took the long way home, driving past familiar landmarks with new eyes. The coffee shop where Travis and I had our first date, he had spent the entire time talking about his career ambitions while I listened attentively, mistaking his self-absorption for passion. The park where he had proposed, a picture-perfect moment he had later complained cost too much after the photographer's bill arrived. The restaurant where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary, I had spent hours making reservations and arrangements while Travis had shown up late, distracted by work calls. These memories, once carefully preserved as evidence of a love story, now revealed themselves as chapters in a different narrative altogether. I pulled into the driveway of our home, a beautiful Tudor-style house that, had originally been my choice, but had somehow become Travis's smart investment in the retelling. Sitting in the quiet car, I allowed myself a moment of honest reflection before facing what waited inside. How had I arrived here? What series of compromises, concessions, and self-deceptions had transformed me from an independent, ambitious woman into someone whose value was measured by how well she served another's needs? The changes had been gradual, almost imperceptible. A small accommodation here, a swallowed objection there. The occasional dismissive comment I chose to ignore. The increasing expectation that my priorities would always yield to his. The subtle shift from our money to Travis's money that I managed, while my own income became our safety net. The financial imbalance was merely a symptom of a deeper dysfunction. Travis didn't just believe he was entitled to my money, he believed he was entitled to my entire identity. My phone buzzed with another text from Travis. On my way home. This ends tonight. The message carried an unmistakable threat, though Travis himself probably didn't recognize it as such. To him, this was simply about restoring the natural order, his comfort, his convenience, his control. But something had shifted. Within me, a fundamental realignment that couldn't be undone. The woman who had driven home tonight was not the same one who had left this morning. Each small act of independence, declining to make his coffee, transferring my share of our money, prioritizing my own career decisions, had strengthened something essential that had nearly been extinguished. Inside the house, I moved with purpose. Instead of starting dinner as I usually would, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island, opening my laptop to review my exit strategy spreadsheet once more. The numbers told a clear story. I had been subsidizing Travis's lifestyle while simultaneously paying down his debts. My own financial health had suffered as a result, retirement contributions minimized, personal savings depleted, investment opportunities missed. Yet, despite this, I was in a surprisingly strong position. My new role would nearly double my income. My credit score was excellent. And without Travis's financial drain, my personal balance sheet would recover quickly. I updated the spreadsheet with new figures: current account balances, remaining debt, obligations, estimated costs for establishing a separate household. Then I created a new tab labeled Worth, where I began cataloging non-financial assets: my professional reputation, my network, my skills, my resilience. This accounting felt more significant than any financial calculation I had ever performed. The sound of Travis's key in the lock pulled me from my reflection. I closed the laptop but remained seated, wine glass in hand, breaking another unwritten rule of our marriage. I always greeted him at the door. Travis entered the kitchen with the energy of someone prepared for battle, his body language tense. He paused momentarily at the sight of me sitting calmly rather than bustling around preparing his dinner. "We need to talk about what's going on," he said without preamble, dropping his briefcase on the counter with more force than necessary. I nodded, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "Yes, we do." My calm seemed to unnerve him more than anger would have. He had prepared for resistance, for emotion, for the familiar dynamics of our disagreements where I would eventually yield for the sake of peace. "You can't just change our financial arrangements without discussing it first," he began, pacing the kitchen. "The mortgage payment bounced back. Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It didn't bounce," I corrected evenly. "The auto payment was canceled. You received instructions on how to make your half of the payment manually." "My half?" His voice rose in disbelief. "Since when do we divide our finances that way?" "Since now," I replied. "It seems more equitable given our current situation." Travis ran a hand through his hair, exasperation mounting. "What situation? What are you talking about? If this is about what I said at the dinner the other week—" "This isn't about any one thing you said," I interrupted, my voice remaining steady. "This is about a pattern that's existed our entire marriage. What pattern? We have a partnership. We support each other. The sincerity in his voice almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But then I remembered the separate savings account he had never mentioned. The debts he had hidden. The countless times he had dismissed my contributions while relying on them absolutely. Travis, I said carefully, do you know how much of your debt I've paid off since we got married? He blinked, genuinely confused by the change in direction. What do you mean, my debt? We consolidated everything when we got married. No, I said, opening my laptop again and turning it toward him. We didn't. These were your debts that I've been systematically paying down for 7 years. He stared at the screen, at the meticulous spreadsheet tracking every payment toward his student loans, credit cards, and personal loans. His expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. That's just how marriage works, he said finally, his tone defensive. Shared responsibilities? Is that why you've maintained a separate savings account I didn't know about? His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. How did you... You mentioned it this morning, I reminded him, when you paid your car bill. The slip registered on his face, a miscalculation in his carefully managed narrative. That's different, he said quickly. It's just a small emergency fund. Everyone should have one. I agree, I replied, which is why I've started rebuilding mine as well. The implications of this statement hung between us. Separate finances, separate safety nets, a step away from the entanglement he had benefited from. Travis's strategy shifted, his expression softening into the charming, persuasive look that had once made my heart race. He moved closer, leaning against the counter beside me. Laura? Honey? I think we're both stressed and overreacting. You've been working too hard. And I haven't been appreciative enough. I get that. The condescension was so familiar I almost smiled. In Travis's world, any conflict could be resolved by placating me, by momentarily acknowledging my feelings before returning to business as usual. This isn't about appreciation, I said, closing my laptop. This is about equality, partnership, honesty. And we can work on all of that, he assured me, reaching for my hand. But first, let's get things back to normal. Fix the mortgage payment. Return the money you transferred out of our account. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't respond to his touch either. Why does normal always mean what's most convenient for you? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable. Because the truth was, our normal had never been healthy or balanced. It had been a carefully constructed environment optimized for Travis's comfort at my expense. And in this moment of quiet reflection, with Travis's hand on mine and his practiced sincerity in my ears, I finally acknowledged what I had known subconsciously, for years. Nothing would change unless I changed it. I'm not going back, I said softly, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Not to how things were. The charm in Travis's expression flickered, replaced momentarily by something harder, colder, a glimpse of the man beneath the mask. And in that unguarded moment, I saw my future with perfect clarity. The days following our confrontation carried a strange duality. On the surface, Travis and I moved through the routines of married life, sharing space, exchanging necessary information, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But beneath this veneer, fundamental calculations were being made on both sides. Travis had retreated to a strategy I recognized well: strategic appeasement. He made his own coffee without comment. He handled his share of the mortgage payment with minimal complaint. He even inquired about my day with a performance of interest that might have fooled me once. I understood the tactic because I had employed it myself countless times. The temporary accommodation designed to weather a storm until normal service could resume. Travis was waiting for my resolve to weaken, for the effort of maintaining boundaries to become too exhausting, for the path of least resistance to beckon me back to my role as his support system. What he didn't understand was that, I was done resisting. The exhausting path had been maintaining his illusions all these years. While Travis waited for my surrender, I was making plans. Concrete, methodical plans that would transform my internal awakening into external reality. The first step was accepting my promotion officially, signing the paperwork that would advance my career, while significantly increasing my financial independence. I did this without discussion or consultation, simply informing Travis after the fact. By the way, I mentioned casually over dinner one evening, I'll be moving to the director position on April 1st. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Director? When did this happen? The official offer came 2 weeks ago, I replied, the deliberate vagueness omitting that I'd known about the promotion possibility for months without sharing it. Travis processed this information, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and calculation before settling on supportive husband. That's great news, he said with manufactured enthusiasm. We should celebrate this weekend. I smiled non-committally. Perhaps. I'll be quite busy with transition planning. The conversation moved on, but I'd observed something important. Travis had immediately tried to insert himself into my achievement, to make it part of our narrative rather than mine alone. We should celebrate. As if my career advancement were a shared accomplishment. It was a small thing, but it crystallized my next strategic decision. While Travis believed I was simply asserting myself within our marriage, I needed to prepare for life entirely separate from him. The following day, I opened a new credit card solely in my name with a significant credit limit. I contacted a real estate agent recommended by a colleague and scheduled a discreet meeting to discuss housing options based on my new income. I researched the least messy approaches to dividing assets in a divorce. Each action was taken with the calm deliberation of someone who had moved beyond emotion to strategy. I wasn't acting out of anger or seeking revenge. I was simply securing my future with the same careful planning I had once devoted to managing. Travis's financial messes. Most significantly, I began documenting our financial history, creating backup copies of statements, transferring records to secure cloud storage, and compiling evidence of how my income had been used to service Travis's debts. If things turned contentious, I would be prepared. At work, I threw myself into preparations for my new role, staying later than usual and bringing projects home on weekends. The extra hours served dual purposes, advancing my career while creating natural distance from Travis. This distance gave me space to see our relationship with increasing clarity. I began noticing patterns that had been invisible when I was entrenched in them. The subtle ways Travis undermined my confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. The strategic helplessness he displayed with tasks he preferred not to handle. The careful management of his charm, deployed not as genuine connection, but as a tool to maintain control. One evening, Travis came home with flowers, the first spontaneous gift he'd offered in years. The gesture was so transparent I almost felt embarrassed for him. "What's the occasion?" I asked, accepting the bouquet with polite detachment. "Do I need an occasion to appreciate my wife?" he replied, leaning in for a kiss that I subtly redirected to my cheek. I placed the flowers in water, noting they were lilies, my second favorite after orchids, a detail Travis had never quite managed to remember despite numerous reminders. Even his attempt at reconciliation revealed his fundamental inattention to who I actually was. "I thought we could go away this weekend," he continued, watching me carefully. "That bed and breakfast in Vermont you always wanted to try. We could both use a break from work." The suggestion was perfectly calculated, appealing to a desire I had expressed years ago, offering an escape from stress, framing it as mutual need rather than his attempt to re-establish control. Had I still been invested in salvaging our marriage, it might have worked. "I can't this weekend," I said without elaboration. "I have commitments." Disappointment flickered across Travis's face, followed by a hint of frustration quickly masked. What commitments? I thought we could reconnect, spend some quality time together. I met his gaze directly. I have a meeting with the transition team on Saturday, and I need Sunday to prepare for next week. Can't you reschedule? This is important, Laura. The old guilt rose reflexively, the ingrained response to prioritizing my needs over his wants. I recognized it, acknowledged it, and let it pass without action. My career is important too, I said simply. Travis stared at me for a long moment, recalibrating. Of course it is. I just meant— I know what you meant. I interrupted gently, and I appreciate the thought, but my answer is still no. That night, lying awake beside Travis's sleeping form, I cemented my strategic decision. I would not leave impulsively or dramatically. I would not negotiate, compromise, or attempt to fix what was fundamentally broken. I would simply continue building my independent life piece by piece until the infrastructure of my freedom was complete. Then, when everything was in place, I would walk away. Not in anger, not seeking reaction or validation, but with the quiet certainty of someone who finally understood her own worth. The path forward was clear now. The only question remaining was how Travis would react when he finally realized I wasn't just adjusting the terms of our relationship, but preparing to end it entirely. The transition to my new role at work coincided with a carefully orchestrated shift in my home life. Each day, I implemented another small change, not out of spite or dramatic intent, but as part of my strategic reclamation of independence. I rearranged my schedule to include early morning workout classes, leaving the house before Travis woke up. I scheduled lunch meetings with colleagues and professional contacts, expanding my network with deliberate purpose. I started a financial management course on Tuesday evenings, ostensibly to enhance my professional credentials, but equally valuable for my personal planning. These changes gave me legitimate reasons to be absent from the home we shared, creating space between us that was both physical and emotional. When Travis questioned these adjustments, I had prepared answers that were reasonable and difficult to challenge. Professional development, health priorities, career networking. You never mentioned wanting to take a finance course before, Travis remarked when I informed him of my Tuesday evening commitment. It's relevant to my new position, I replied with a simple certainty that left little room for objection. Each absence carried a secondary benefit. They forced Travis to handle aspects of daily life he had previously delegated to me. Cooking his own meals, managing his own schedule, dealing with household maintenance issues that couldn't wait for my return. The results were predictably uneven. Some evenings I came home to find he had ordered takeout, the containers left on the counter beside unwashed dishes. Other times, he made awkward but genuine attempts at taking on responsibilities, like the night I returned to find he had prepared a basic pasta dinner. I wasn't sure when you'd be back, he said, a statement that carried equal parts accusation and uncertainty. Thank you for cooking, I responded, acknowledging the effort without apology for my absence. Alongside these visible changes, I was implementing less obvious ones. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney, meeting during my lunch hour to discuss options and procedures. I secured a small apartment that would be available at the beginning of May, signing the lease, with a sense of quiet determination. I began gradually moving important documents and irreplaceable personal items to a safety deposit box at a bank Travis didn't use. Each action was taken with care to maintain the appearance of normalcy while systematically dismantling the infrastructure of our shared life. I wasn't being deceptive so much as protective of myself, my future, and my financial security. The most significant implementation, however, was internal. I began practicing a new way of relating to Travis, one built on neither accommodation nor antagonism, but rather a neutral, measured engagement that offered neither the emotional support he had come to expect nor the conflict he could use to paint me as irrational. When he complained about a difficult client, I listened without offering solutions. When he left his clothes on the floor, I stepped around them without comment. When he made pointed remarks about the changes in my behavior, I acknowledged them without defensiveness or explanation. "You're different lately," he observed one evening, as I reviewed work documents instead of watching TV with him as I once would have. "Yes," I agreed, not looking up from my laptop. He waited for elaboration, for reassurance, for the familiar pattern of me managing his emotional comfort. When none came, he shifted uncomfortably. "Is this still about what I said at that dinner?" Because I've apologized for that. In fact, he hadn't actually apologized. He had merely acknowledged that I was upset, a distinction I once would have overlooked in my eagerness to maintain peace. I closed my laptop and met his gaze directly. "This isn't about any single incident, Travis." "Then what is it about?" "Because I feel like you're pulling away, and I don't understand why." The opening was there. To explain, to justify, to engage in the kind of emotional labor I had always performed, translating my experience into terms he could understand without too much discomfort. But that was the old pattern, the one I was systematically replacing. "I'm prioritizing differently now," I said simply. My focus has shifted. His frustration was visible, the furrow between his brows deepening. "That's not an explanation, Laura." I nodded, acknowledging his statement without feeling obligated to address it. "I'm going to bed. Early meeting tomorrow." As I gathered my things, Travis's voice followed me, sharper now. "You can't just shut me out like this. We're married. This isn't how marriage works." I paused at the foot of the stairs, considering my response carefully. "Perhaps we have different understandings of how marriage works." His expression shifted from frustration to wariness. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I no longer believe marriage requires me to make myself smaller for your comfort." The words landed with quiet precision. Travis stared at me, momentarily speechless, caught between denial and the dawning recognition that something fundamental had indeed changed. I didn't wait for his response, continuing upstairs with the steady pace of someone who knew exactly where she was going. That night became a template for the weeks that followed. Travis oscillated between strategies, charm offensives followed by wounded withdrawal, sincere-seeming interest in my life alternating with passive-aggressive comments about my changed priorities. He was a man testing different keys against a lock that had been completely replaced. Meanwhile, I continued implementing my exit plan with methodical care. I scheduled appointments with our shared banks to remove my name from joint credit accounts. I documented our household inventory, noting which items had been purchased with whose funds. I researched health insurance options that would replace the coverage I currently had through Travis's employer. These practical steps were matched by professional ones. In my new director role, I began building my team, establishing systems, and creating the foundation for long-term success. My colleagues noted the change in my demeanor, a new confidence, a willingness to take up space and assert opinions that I had once carefully modulated. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up," Marlene commented after I had successfully navigated a challenging negotiation with a key client. "You're really coming into your own." The irony wasn't lost on me that as my marriage was systematically being dismantled, my professional life was flourishing. But perhaps it wasn't ironic at all. Perhaps it was simply cause and effect, the natural result of redirecting energy from maintaining Travis's comfort to nurturing my own potential. One evening, about 3 weeks into my new role, I came home to find Travis waiting for me, a glass of wine already poured at my usual place at the kitchen island. His expression carried a determination that told me he had planned this moment carefully. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious but controlled. "Really talk, Laura, about what's happening with us." I set down my bag, accepting the glass of wine without sitting. "All right." Travis took a deep breath, as if preparing to deliver a practiced speech. I know things have been strained lately. I know I've taken you for granted in ways I shouldn't have. But whatever issues we're having, we can work through them. That's what marriage is. Working through the hard times together. His words were reasonable, his tone sincere. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, it might have been enough to draw me back into the familiar pattern. But I was implementing a different future now. One built on a clear-eyed assessment of not just what Travis said in moments of reconciliation, but what he did consistently when it counted. Some things can be worked through, I agreed, taking a sip of wine. And some things reveal fundamental incompatibilities that no amount of work can resolve. Travis's expression faltered, the script he had prepared suddenly insufficient for the conversation we were actually having. "What are you saying?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. I met his gaze steadily, neither harsh nor yielding. "I'm saying I've made my decision, Travis. And it's not the one you're hoping for." The shift in Travis's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The practiced charm vanished, replaced by a cold calculation I had glimpsed only in unguarded moments. "Throughout our marriage, what exactly do you mean by decision?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. I took another sip of wine before answering, using the moment to center myself. "I mean that I'm planning to file for divorce, Travis." The words hung in the air between us, simple and irrevocable. Speaking them aloud after weeks of preparation felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding for years. Travis stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally, a calculating assessment. "This is ridiculous," he said dismissively. "You're overreacting to a rough patch." "No," I replied evenly. "I'm responding to a pattern that's existed our entire marriage." He pushed away from the counter, beginning to pace. "What pattern? Because I made one comment at a dinner? Because I've been busy with work? Every marriage has challenges, Laura. You don't just throw it all away over temporary problems." "These aren't temporary problems," I said. "They're fundamental issues about respect, partnership, and honesty. Issues that have been present from the beginning." Travis's jaw tightened. "So you've just been secretly unhappy for 7 years? That's not very honest either, is it?" It was a clever pivot, attempting to position me as the dishonest party. I recognized the tactic and refused to be defensive. "I've been gradually recognizing patterns I couldn't see when I was in the middle of them," I clarified. "And now that I see them clearly, I can't unsee them." "This is about the promotion, isn't it?" he said, changing tactics. "You get a little power at work and suddenly you think you don't need me." I almost smiled at how revealing the comment was. His assumption that our relationship was fundamentally about need rather than choice or love. My promotion simply highlighted contrasts I couldn't ignore, I acknowledged. The difference between how I'm valued professionally and how I've been valued in this marriage. Travis ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "So what? I'm supposed to applaud every little thing you do? Give you a gold star for basic adult responsibilities? No," I said quietly. "You're supposed to see me as an equal partner, not someone whose primary value is in how well I serve your needs." His expression darkened. "That's how you see our marriage? You serving my needs? That says more about your perspective than mine, Laura." It was a masterful deflection, attempting to position my legitimate concerns as a distortion. The old Laura might have doubted herself, might have wondered if she was indeed misinterpreting everything. But I had done too much reflection, seen too many patterns with clear eyes to be swayed now. "Perhaps it does," I conceded, neither defensive nor combative. "And that perspective leads me to end this marriage." Travis switched strategies again, his voice softening as he moved toward me. "Laura, listen to yourself. This isn't you. You're stressed about the new job, feeling overwhelmed. Let's take that weekend away, reconnect, remember what matters." I stepped back, maintaining the physical distance between us. "I know exactly who I am, Travis. more clearly than I have in years. His features hardened at my rejection. So that's it? 7 years of marriage, and you've just unilaterally decided it's over without even trying to fix things? I've been trying to fix things for 7 years, I corrected him gently. By accommodating, by compromising, by managing your finances, by supporting your career at the expense of my own advancement, I'm done fixing. Travis's resistance escalated over the days that followed, a carefully orchestrated campaign deployed on multiple fronts. First came the emotional appeal. He left heartfelt notes where I would find them, texted memories of happier times, spoke of regrets and second chances, promised change with seemingly genuine remorse. When that failed to sway me, he shifted to financial intimidation. "You know this will hurt you more than me," he said one evening after I declined yet another reconciliation attempt. "I've talked to a lawyer. You'll lose the house, half your retirement. You're not thinking this through." I met his gaze steadily. "I've considered all the financial implications very carefully, Travis. Unlike you, I don't make financial decisions impulsively." The barb landed precisely, his face flushing with anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm fully aware of our financial situation, both joint and separate, all of it. The implication that I knew about financial matters he had kept hidden hung between us, his expression confirming my suspicions that there were indeed more secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. When financial threats didn't work, Travis escalated to social pressure. He contacted my parents, presenting himself as the concerned husband worried about my sudden changes in behavior. He reached out to our mutual friends, sharing selective details that painted him as the blindsided spouse trying to save our marriage. "Your mother called me today," I told him calmly after receiving a concerned message from her. "Interesting that she thinks I might be having a nervous breakdown." Travis had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before defensiveness took over. "I'm worried about you. Everyone is. This isn't like you, Laura." "No," I agreed. "It's not like the version of me you've come to rely on. That's rather the point." The social campaign backfired spectacularly when I met with my parents in person, explaining the financial realities I had been managing and showing them documentation of how I had been systematically paying down Travis's debts while he continued spending beyond our means. "I had no idea," my mother said, her initial concern transforming to indignation. "He made it sound like you were behaving erratically, making impulsive decisions." "It was a calculated misrepresentation," I explained. "One of many I've realized were part of our relationship dynamic." My father, always the more reserved of my parents, reached for my hand. "I'm sorry we doubted you, even for a moment. It's just that you always made everything seem perfect with Travis." "I know," I acknowledged. "That was my mistake. Maintaining an illusion so convincing that even those who love me couldn't see through it. When emotional appeals, financial, threats, and social pressure all failed, Travis resorted to his final strategy, targeted cruelty designed to undermine my confidence. "You know no one at that firm actually respects you, right?" he remarked casually one morning as I prepared for work. "Marcus told me they needed to fill a diversity quota for the director level. That's the only reason you got the promotion." I continued gathering my materials, not giving him the reaction he sought. "Interesting perspective." "And that apartment you think I don't know about?" he continued, the revelation intended to shock me. "It's in a terrible school district. Not that it matters for you, but it shows your financial judgment isn't as sound as you think." I shouldered my bag, meeting his gaze directly. "School districts are irrelevant for a short-term residence with no children, as you well know. And I'm curious how you knew about the apartment. Have you been monitoring my emails, Travis?" His momentary hesitation confirmed my suspicion. I made a mental note to change all my passwords immediately and use only my secure work email for sensitive communications going forward. "I haven't been monitoring anything," he denied unconvincingly. "I just know you better than you think." I smiled slightly. "No, Travis. That's precisely the problem. You never knew me at all, only the version of me you wanted to see. As I walked out the door, his final attempt to regain control followed me. This divorce will destroy you financially, Laura. I'll make sure of it. I turned back, meeting his gaze with a calm that came from absolute certainty. No, Travis. It won't. Because unlike you, I've been preparing for this moment with the same careful attention I once devoted to managing your debts. The shock in his eyes was confirmation that despite his discovery of the apartment, he still had no idea how thoroughly I had planned my exit, or how completely I had documented our financial history. His external resistance was predictable, even understandable. What Travis failed to grasp was that each attempt to control, manipulate, or intimidate me only strengthened my resolve and justified my decision. The Laura who had once sought his approval at any cost was gone. In her place stood a woman who recognized every tactic for what it was, the desperate measures of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. As Travis escalated his resistance, I paradoxically found myself with an unexpected resource: energy. The mental and emotional labor of maintaining our marriage, anticipating his needs, managing his moods, covering his financial missteps, had consumed far more of my vital force than I had realized. Now, that energy was mine to redirect. I channeled it first into my new role at work. The challenges of directing a financial team would have once seemed overwhelming when balanced against my domestic responsibilities. Now, I approached them with a clarity and focus that surprised even me. The Davidson restructuring proposal is excellent, Richard, the CEO, commented after I presented my team's strategy for a major client, particularly the contingency planning for market volatility. Thank you, I replied, accepting the praise. Directly rather than deflecting or minimizing it as I once would have. We've built in multiple scenario projections to ensure flexibility regardless of what happens with interest rates. Marlene caught up with me after the meeting, falling into step beside me as we walked back to our offices. Something's different about you, she observed. You've always been competent, but lately there's something more, a confidence, an edge. I smiled, considering how to respond. Marlene wasn't just a colleague, but the closest thing I had to a friend at work. Let's just say I've been reevaluating some aspects of my life that were draining rather than supporting me. Understanding flickered in her eyes. Ah, marriage stuff? Something like that, I acknowledged. She nodded, no further questions needed. Well, whatever it is, it's working for you professionally. The team responds to it. Even Marcus has noticed. I overheard him telling Richard you're bringing a new energy to the department. The irony wasn't lost on me. That stepping away from Travis's constant diminishment allowed others to see my capabilities more clearly. Or perhaps it was simpler. I was finally seeing myself clearly, and that clarity was visible to everyone around me. Beyond work, I redirected energy into creating the foundation for my new life. The apartment I had secured was modest but well located. Walking distance from a small park and several good restaurants. I began purchasing essentials, quality kitchenware, new linens, a comfortable reading chair, having them delivered directly to the apartment rather than our home. Each item was selected with deliberate attention to my own preferences, not calculated, to please Travis or maintain a certain image. The simple freedom of choosing a duvet cover without considering whether it matched Travis's aesthetic was surprisingly liberating. I also invested energy in rebuilding connections that had atrophied during my marriage. I met my college roommate for dinner, reconnecting over pasta and wine without watching the clock or texting Travis with updates on when I'd be home. I joined a financial literacy group that offered workshops for women rebuilding after divorce, not just for the practical advice, but for the community of women with similar experiences. It's like waking up from a dream where you thought you were happy, only to realize you were actually underwater, holding your breath the whole time. said Caitlin, a woman in the group who was 6 months ahead of me in her divorce journey. The we metaphor resonated so powerfully, I felt it physically. Yes, I agreed. And you don't realize how much energy it took to hold that breath until you finally allow yourself to surface and breathe. These connections provided not just emotional support, but practical assistance. Through the group, I found a better divorce attorney than my initial consultation. Through professional networking, I secured an introduction to a financial advisor, specializing in post-divorce wealth rebuilding. Each step I took, each connection I made, each new aspect of independence I established served dual purposes, creating my future while simultaneously demonstrating to Travis that his resistance was futile. I was not simply threatening to leave. I was already gone in all the ways that mattered. Our continued sharing of physical space merely a transitional detail. Travis noticed, of course. How could he not? The gradual disappearance of personal items from our home. The evenings when I returned late, energized rather than exhausted. The weekends when I was absent without detailed explanation of my whereabouts. His reactions cycled through now familiar patterns. Accusation. So you're already moving on before we're even divorced? Wounded innocence. I thought we might still have a chance to work things out. Financial threats. You realize you can't afford this lifestyle without me, right? I met each reaction with the same steady calm, neither engaging in argument nor offering reassurance. This consistency seemed to unsettle Travis more than any emotional response would have. One evening, he confronted me directly after discovering a receipt for a dining room table delivered to an address he didn't recognize. "You're really doing this," he said, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "You're actually setting up a whole new life." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing quarterly projections for a client. Yes. Without even telling me behind my back. "I told you I was filing for divorce, Travis. Setting up a new residence is a logical next step." He crumpled the receipt, tossing it onto the counter between us. "This is more than a residence, this is—" He gestured vaguely, struggling to articulate what was becoming increasingly clear. "You're building a whole life that doesn't include me." "Yes," I agreed simply. The directness of my response seemed to knock him off balance. He had prepared for denial, for explanation, for the emotional labor I had always performed to ease his discomfort. My refusal to provide it left him momentarily speechless. "Why?" he finally asked, the question containing layers of genuine confusion beneath the anger. "What happened to us? We were good together, Laura." I studied him, wondering if he actually believed what he was saying, or if this was simply another strategy. "Were we? Or were you good, while I made sure everything in your life worked smoothly?" "That's not fair. I worked hard. I provided for us." "We both worked hard," I corrected him. "And financially we contributed equally, though you never seemed to recognize that." Travis's expression shifted, frustration giving way to something that almost resembled genuine self-reflection. "I know I said things sometimes, made jokes I shouldn't have. But that's not a reason to throw away 7 years. It's not about the jokes, Travis, or any single incident. It's about a fundamental imbalance that existed from the beginning, one that I allowed and participated in until I couldn't anymore." He leaned against the counter, suddenly looking tired. "And there's nothing I can say that would make you reconsider?" For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old pull, the instinct to comfort, to reconcile, to return to the familiar pattern, even knowing its destructive nature. I acknowledged the feeling, then let it pass without action. "No," I said gently. "There isn't." Travis nodded slowly, a resignation in his posture that I hadn't seen before. "When?" "The moving truck comes on." "Saturday," I replied. "I'll be completely out by Sunday evening." He absorbed this information silently, then pushed away from the counter. "I have a client dinner. he said, not meeting my eyes. Don't wait up. After he left, I sat in the quiet kitchen that had once been the command center of my domestic management. The space felt different now, no longer a site of invisible labor, but simply a room I would soon leave behind. I opened my laptop again, returning to the work that now occupied the center of my redirected energy. Not because I was hiding from emotions, but because I was investing in the future I had chosen, one where my skills, judgment, and worth were recognized not just by others, but by myself. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a day, long anticipated. The moving truck was scheduled for noon, giving me the morning to complete my final preparations. I had been methodically packing for weeks, storing boxes in the guest room that Travis rarely entered, but there were still last-minute items to organize. I was carefully wrapping my grandmother's china when I heard Travis's footsteps on the stairs. He had been noticeably absent the previous evening, returning home well after midnight and sleeping in the guest room. I had expected this, the avoidance, of what he couldn't control, but was surprised when he appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me in silence. "Can I help?" he finally asked, the question so unexpected I nearly dropped the delicate teacup in my hands. I studied him for a moment, searching for signs of sarcasm or manipulation. Finding none, I nodded toward a stack of books. "Those need to go in that box. Just make sure to wrap the hardcovers." Travis moved into the room with uncharacteristic hesitation, picking up the packing paper and a book on financial strategy I'd been reading. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if he was performing an unfamiliar task. We worked in silence for several minutes, the only sound the crinkling of paper and the soft thud of items being placed in boxes. It was perhaps the most honest interaction we'd had in years. No pretense, no performance, just the physical reality of separation. "I got a call from American Express yesterday," Travis said finally, his voice carefully neutral as he wrapped. "Another book. Apparently, I'm 3 months behind on payments." I continued packing, neither surprised nor concerned. "Yes? You've always handled that account." "I stopped making payments on your personal credit card 6 weeks ago," I confirmed, as I mentioned when I removed the auto payments. Travis set the book down, turning to face me directly. "My credit score has dropped 80 points. There was an accusation in his statement, but also something else. The dawning recognition of concrete consequences. This wasn't about emotional dynamics or power struggles anymore. This was tangible, measurable impact. "Financial decisions have financial consequences," I said simply, neither apologetic nor triumphant. "I have the Preston dinner next week. I was going to use that card." I sealed a box before responding, labeling it "Kitchen Fragile" in neat block letters. "You'll need to make other arrangements." Travis ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as signaling genuine stress rather than performative. Frustration. "It's not that simple. Marcus is bringing potential investors. This dinner matters for my position at the firm." For a moment, I felt the familiar pull, the ingrained instinct to solve Travis's problem, to make his path smooth regardless of the cost to myself. I acknowledged the feeling, then let it pass without action. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, moving to collect another stack of items for packing. Travis watched me, his expression shifting as he processed this new reality, one where his problems remained his to solve. "This is really happening," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." The movers arrived precisely at noon, efficient professionals who had clearly managed many divorce separations before. They knew which questions to ask, which items typically caused conflict, which paperwork needed to be signed. Travis hovered at the periphery, watching as half of our shared life was systematically loaded onto the truck. It was during this process that the first truly significant impact of our separation became visible, As the movers carried out furniture and boxes, Travis retreated to his home office, ostensibly to stay out of the way. When I knocked to ask about a shared decorative item we hadn't discussed, he was on the phone, his voice carrying the tight control of someone delivering difficult news. "Yes, I understand the payment was due last week," he was saying. "There's been a temporary administrative issue with our accounts. I can provide partial payment today and the remainder by Friday." I withdrew without interrupting, recognizing the conversation for what it was. Travis confronting the financial reality I had managed invisibly for years. Without my careful juggling of payment schedules, strategic allocation of funds, and occasional infusions from my personal savings, the precarious tower of Travis's financial life was beginning to wobble. This wasn't vindication. I had never wanted Travis to suffer. I had simply stopped preventing the natural consequences of his own choices. There was no satisfaction in witnessing his struggles, only confirmation that my decision was necessary for my own well-being. By late afternoon, the truck was loaded. I stood in what had once been our shared bedroom, now half empty, checking one last time for anything I might have overlooked. Travis appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "So that's it?" he asked, gesturing to the bare spaces where my belongings had been. "That's it," I confirmed. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you? This wasn't a sudden decision." "Yes, since the night you called me useless in front of your colleagues." His gaze snapped to mine, surprise evident. "That's what this is about? One stupid comment at a dinner?" "No," I replied evenly. "That was simply the moment I finally saw our marriage clearly. The moment I realized I'd been maintaining an illusion at the expense of my own worth." Travis's posture shifted subtly, defensive now. "So you decided to punish me by disappearing and leaving me with financial chaos?" "I decided to stop enabling patterns that were destructive for both of us," I corrected him. "The financial chaos, as you call it, is simply what happens when you live beyond your means without someone else covering the difference." He flinched slightly but pressed on. "What about the debt? You've been making such a big deal about paying off my debt, but that was marital debt. That's what couples do. They help each other." I smiled slightly, having anticipated this argument. "The $120,000 in debt I've been systematically paying down was accumulated before our marriage, Travis. Your student loans, your credit cards, even gambling debts you thought I didn't know about." The color drained from his face. "How did you—" "I'm a financial analyst," I reminded him gently. "Tracking money is quite literally my profession." Travis stared at me, reassessing everything he thought he knew about our marriage and about me. "All this time, you were—" "Yes," I confirmed. "All this time, I was managing your pre-existing debt while you continued creating more. All while believing your income was what kept us afloat." The irony seemed to hit him physically, his shoulder sinking against the doorframe. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" It was a fair question, perhaps the first genuine one he had asked since this process began. I considered it carefully before answering. At first, because I believed that's what love meant. Supporting your partner unconditionally, carrying their burdens without complaint. Later, because questioning your financial decisions always led to dismissal or mockery. Eventually, because I had invested so much in maintaining the illusion that acknowledging the truth felt like admitting failure. Travis absorbed this, silence stretching between us. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. "And now?" "Now," I said, picking up my final bag, "I'm choosing to invest in myself instead." I moved toward the door where he stood. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside to let me pass. As I reached the stairs, his voice followed me. Quieter now. "For what it's worth, I never actually thought you were useless." I paused, turning back to meet his gaze one last time. "I know. You just never thought about what it cost me to be useful, to you." With that, I descended the stairs, walking through the house that had been both my prison and my project for 7 years. At the front door, I placed my key on the entry table, a small symbolic gesture marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of new possibilities. The moving truck waited at the curb, ready to transport me to the life I had carefully constructed. A life built not in reaction to Travis, but in alignment with my own worth. As I walked down the path, I didn't look back. There was no need. Everything that mattered was ahead of me now. My new apartment welcomed me with the quiet expectation of empty spaces waiting to be filled. The movers efficiently transferred boxes and furniture, following my directions for placement. By evening, the essential framework of my new life was in place: bed assembled, kitchen basics unpacked, bathroom arranged with my familiar toiletries. Standing in the center of my living room, surrounded by labeled boxes yet to be unpacked, I experienced a moment of unexpected vertigo. For 7 years, every decision, every arrangement, every aspect of my domestic life had been calculated against Travis's preferences and needs. Now, even simple choices, where to place a lamp, which cabinet should hold glasses versus plates, were solely mine. The freedom was both exhilarating and disorienting, like stepping onto solid ground after years at sea. The constant, subtle adjustments I had made to maintain stability in turbulent waters were no longer necessary, leaving me with an unfamiliar steadiness. I allowed myself to sit with this feeling rather than rushing past it. This transition was not just physical, but existential, a fundamental shift in how I occupied space in the world. It deserved acknowledgement. My phone chimed with a text from Travis. "The house feels empty." 3 simple words that could be interpreted as either emotional manipulation or genuine observation, perhaps both simultaneously. I didn't respond, choosing instead to continue unpacking my books, arranging them on shelves not according to Travis's preferred system, alphabetical by author, nonfiction and fiction strictly separated, but in intuitive groupings that made sense to me alone. Sunday passed in a blur of practical tasks, setting up utilities in my name, organizing my new home office, placing the art I had carefully selected over the years but had often compromised on when it came to display in our shared home. By evening, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep on my new couch, a documentary about financial markets playing unwatched on my laptop. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of a workday, but the novel experience of preparing for it in my own space, at my own pace. No need to manage Travis's schedule alongside my own. No careful dance around bathroom timing or breakfast preparations. Just the simple, direct movement from sleep to shower, to coffee, to professional readiness. At work, I immersed myself in the complexities of client portfolios and team management, the structured challenges providing welcome contrast to the emotional territory I had been navigating. Colleagues commented on my energy, my focus, unaware of the significant life change that had occurred over the weekend. "The Davidson portfolio review is ready for your approval," my assistant mentioned during our morning check-in. Also, Travis called twice. "He didn't leave a message, but asked me to let you know he's trying to reach you." I nodded, neither surprised nor concerned. "Thank you. I'll review the Davidson materials before lunch." My assistant hesitated, clearly curious about the ignored messages from my husband, but too professional to ask directly. I offered no explanation, maintaining the boundary between my personal transformation and professional environment. By midday, Travis had called 4 more times and sent multiple texts, each increasingly urgent. "We need to discuss the mortgage payment. The Amex representative says you removed yourself from the account. Is that true? Marcus is asking questions about the Preston dinner. I need to talk to you about this. Laura, this is serious. Call me back." Each message represented a problem I would have once immediately solved, a responsibility I would have automatically assumed. Each unanswered text was a small but significant reinforcement of my decision. a declaration that Travis's urgencies were no longer my emergencies. It was during a meeting with my team that afternoon that the point of no return was truly crossed. My phone buzzed repeatedly with Travis's name on the screen, the sixth call of the day. I silenced it without breaking the flow of our discussion about market projections for the upcoming quarter. 10 minutes later, Marlene appeared at the conference room door, an apologetic expression on her face. "Sorry to interrupt, Laura, but there's someone rather insistent on seeing you. Says it's an emergency." Before I could respond, Travis appeared behind her, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Tie slightly askew, hair less perfectly styled than usual, the shadow of stubble on his jaw suggesting he had rushed out without his typical grooming routine. "Laura," he said, his voice straddling the line between demand and plea. "I need to speak with you. Now." The conference room fell silent, my team members exchanging uncomfortable glances at this unexpected intrusion. I felt a momentary flush of embarrassment, quickly replaced by a calm clarity. This moment, Travis bringing our private life into my professional space without consideration for the boundaries I had established, crystallized exactly why separation was necessary. I turned to my team. "Let's take 15 minutes. When we return, I'd like to continue with the international market assessment." As they filed out, expressions carefully neutral but curiosity evident, I gestured Travis into the room and closed the door behind us. "This is inappropriate," I said, my voice low but firm. "You don't come to my workplace unannounced." "You weren't answering my calls," he countered, as if this justified his behavior. "The mortgage payment bounced, Laura. The bank called. My credit score is in free fall. And now Marcus is questioning whether I can handle the Preston account given my apparent personal financial issues." The consequences he feared were materializing faster than either of us had anticipated. In just 2 days without my financial management, the carefully constructed facade of Travis's professional competence was beginning to crack. "I'm sorry you're experiencing difficulties," I said, meaning it sincerely despite the circumstances. "But these are separate issues now. Your financial management is your responsibility, just as mine is mine." Travis stared at me, incredulity mixing with growing panic. "You can't just walk away from joint financial obligations. The mortgage has both our names on it." "Check your email," I replied evenly. "I sent instructions for setting up automatic payments from your account last week, along with the exact amount that represents my half of our joint obligations. I've already transferred my portion for this month." "That's not—" He stopped, recalibrating. "Look, I understand you're upset about things I've said, about not feeling appreciated. But this scorched earth approach isn't like you, Laura. You're hurting yourself financially just to prove a point." I almost smiled at his continued misunderstanding of the situation. "I'm not hurting myself, Travis. I've carefully evaluated my financial position. My half of the mortgage is comfortably within my budget. Can you say the same?" The question hit its mark with precision. Travis's financial difficulties weren't due to the separation of our finances. They were simply being revealed by it. The truth he had avoided for years was now impossible to ignore. His lifestyle had been subsidized by my careful management and occasional supplementation from my own resources. "This isn't just about money," he said, changing tactics. "What about our marriage? 7 years together, and you just walk away without even trying counseling or—" "I left a marriage where I was called useless, despite paying off $120,000 of your premarital debt," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I left a relationship where my financial expertise was mocked even as it was relied upon. I left a dynamic that diminished me personally while draining me financially." Travis flinched, then gathered himself. "One comment at a dinner, one stupid joke that I've apologized for. That's what you're destroying everything over?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm rebuilding my life based on years of evidence about what our marriage actually was, not what I pretended it was." That comment was simply the moment the illusion became impossible to maintain. A knock at the door signaled my team's return. I straightened my posture, the physical embodiment of the boundary I was establishing. I need to return to my meeting. Now, Travis, please don't come to my workplace again. Any financial matters can be addressed through our attorneys. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the familiar signs of yielding, of accommodation. Finding none, something in his expression shifted. A recognition, perhaps, that we had indeed reached a point from which there was no return. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but the words carried less conviction than resignation. "Yes," I replied with gentle finality. "It is." As he left, shoulders slightly hunched in a posture I had never seen from the typically confident Travis, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the clean certainty of having finally crossed the threshold between who I had been and who I was becoming. My team filed back in, carefully avoiding direct questions about the interruption. I resumed our meeting with renewed focus, the professional competence that had always been mine, now uninhibited by the energy once devoted to maintaining Travis's illusions. The point of no return had been crossed, and contrary to Travis's predictions, I wasn't drowning without him. I was finally learning to breathe. In the weeks following Travis's workplace confrontation, I established a new rhythm to my life, one built around my own priorities rather than someone else's needs. Mornings began with coffee and financial news rather than orchestrating Travis's schedule. Evenings were spent developing strategies for my team or enjoying dinner with reconnected friends instead of managing household logistics that primarily benefited my husband. This reclaimed time and mental space allowed me to excel in my new role. Under my direction, the financial division secured 2 major clients previously considered unattainable. My approach to risk assessment, balanced but innovative, earned recognition from the executive team. The woman Travis had dismissed as useless when it comes to actual finance was now being profiled in the company newsletter as a rising star. Meanwhile, the consequences of our separation continued to unfold for Travis, accelerating beyond what either of us had anticipated. Learned about these developments not from Travis directly. Our communication was now limited to necessary exchanges through attorneys, but through the inevitable overlap of our professional and social circles. "Did you hear about Travis's presentation for the Preston account?" Diane asked during a rare lunch we shared. As Marcus's wife, she had insider knowledge of the firm's dynamics that went beyond office gossip. I sipped my water, maintaining a neutral expression. "I haven't." Diane hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share given my ongoing divorce. "It was unfortunate. He was unprepared, got defensive when Marcus questioned his projections, and then—" She paused, lowering her voice despite the private table we occupied. "His credit card was declined when he tried to pay for the client's dinner afterward. Marcus had to cover it." I nodded without comment, neither celebrating Travis's professional stumble nor rushing to explain or defend it. This neutrality seemed to give Diane permission to continue. "The thing is," she said, leaning closer, "everyone's noticed changes in him lately. He's missing deadlines, showing up unprepared for meetings, making calculation errors that aren't like him." The picture she painted was familiar, the inevitable consequences of someone suddenly responsible for managing details that had always been invisibly handled by someone else. The professional facade Travis had maintained was crumbling without the infrastructure I had provided. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it sincerely despite everything. I had never wished for Travis's failure, only for my own freedom. Diane studied me with new understanding. "It makes me wonder how much you were managing behind the scenes all these years." "We all make choices about what we invest our energy in," I replied diplomatically. "I've simply redirected mine." The professional consequences for Travis continued to compound. Through industry channels, I learned he had been removed from the Preston account. the one he had prioritized above all others, the one whose dinners had been essential networking, regardless of our budget constraints. Without my behind-the-scenes support, reviewing his presentations, catching calculation errors, reminding him of client details, Travis's performance had deteriorated beyond what his charm could compensate for. The financial consequences were even more severe. My attorney forwarded me a request from Travis's lawyer asking for a temporary delay in divorce proceedings due to unexpected financial hardship. The letter obliquely referenced temporary cash flow issues and credit limitations that made immediate property division discussions challenging. I instructed my attorney to proceed as planned. This wasn't vindictiveness, it was simply the reality that Travis needed to face. The financial house of cards he had constructed, which I had long supported through my careful management, was collapsing at an accelerated pace now that its foundation had been removed. Then came the inevitable social fallout. Bethany Preston called me directly, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating awkward circumstances. "Laura, I'm hosting the seasonal dinner next week, and I wanted to clarify the situation. Travis has already RSVP'd, but given your separation, I wasn't sure if you'd be comfortable attending." The invitation confirmed what I had suspected. Travis was continuing to leverage social connections built during our marriage, maintaining the appearance of his former life even as its substance dissolved. "Thank you for considering my comfort." "Bethany," I replied, "I think it's best if I decline this time." "Of course, I completely understand," she said, relief evident in her tone. Then, hesitating slightly, "This is a bit awkward, but Travis indicated to Marcus that your separation is temporary, a cooling-off period while you reconsider things." The misrepresentation was so characteristic that I almost laughed. Even now, Travis was constructing a narrative that preserved his image and implied future reconciliation. "Our divorce proceedings are moving forward as scheduled," I stated simply. "Any other characterization is inaccurate." The silence that followed carried the weight of realization, not just Bethany processing the truth of my situation, but my own recognition of how completely Travis had controlled our shared narrative throughout our marriage. "I see," Bethany finally said. "Well, you're always welcome in our home, Laura, with or without Travis." The offer of continued social connection independent of my soon-to-be ex-husband was unexpected, but affirming. The relationships I had cultivated, even within Travis's professional circle, had value beyond their connection to him. The most dramatic escalation came approximately 6 weeks after our separation. My attorney contacted me with information that simultaneously shocked me and confirmed my worst suspicions about Travis's financial behavior. "The mortgage lender has initiated foreclosure proceedings on your marital home," she informed me during our scheduled update call. "It appears there have been no payments made for the past 2 months, despite your transfers to cover your portion." The revelation was staggering not just in its immediate implications, but in what it suggested about Travis's financial management in my absence. Despite having received my half of the mortgage payment each month, he had apparently diverted those funds elsewhere, allowing our home to fall into default. "Has Travis been notified?" I asked, maintaining my composure despite the seriousness of the situation. "Yes, the lender has made multiple attempts to contact him. According to their records, he has not responded to any communications." I processed this information with the detached analysis I applied to complex client portfolios. The home that Travis had always referred to as his smart investment was now at risk because he had failed to manage even the most basic financial obligation. The irony was palpable, but brought no satisfaction. "What does this mean for the divorce proceedings?" I asked, focusing on practical implications rather than emotional reactions. "It complicates the property division," my attorney explained. "But we've documented your consistent payment of your portion, which protects you from claims of contributing to the default. More concerning is the potential impact on your credit score if this continues." I'd like to explore options for removing my name from the mortgage immediately, even if it requires buying out my portion at a loss, I replied, already calculating potential scenarios and their financial implications. As my attorney outlined possible approaches, I found myself reflecting on the accelerating collapse of Travis's carefully constructed image, the professional reputation built on charm and selective competence, the social standing maintained through strategic connections, the financial facade sustained by my invisible management. All of it was crumbling faster than either of us had anticipated. The consequences weren't just financial or professional, but deeply personal for Travis. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned he had been drinking more heavily, appearing disheveled at work, and making increasingly desperate attempts to maintain appearances despite mounting evidence of his struggling reality. These developments brought me no joy. There was no vindictive satisfaction in watching someone I had once loved face the natural consequences of choices long insulated by my intervention. There was only the clear-eyed recognition that this outcome had always been inevitable. I had merely postponed it through years of quiet compensation for Travis's financial mismanagement. As the foreclosure notice made headlines in local real estate circles, the final illusion Travis had maintained, that our separation was temporary and reconciliation possible, became impossible to sustain. The escalating consequences had forced a reckoning that no amount of charm or manipulation could deflect, and through it all, I continued building my new life, piece by piece, day by day, not in reaction to Travis's mounting problems, but in alignment with my own rediscovered worth. 3 months after moving into my new apartment, I sat across from my attorney in her sleek downtown office, reviewing the final divorce settlement. The process had been more complicated than anticipated, largely due to Travis's mounting financial issues and reluctance to finalize property divisions. He's requesting another extension, my attorney explained, indicating the latest communication from Travis's lawyer, citing ongoing negotiations with the mortgage lender and inability to refinance the home in his name alone. I studied the document, noting the carefully worded desperation beneath the legal language. What's your recommendation? We've already granted 2 extensions. The court is unlikely to look favorably on another delay without extraordinary circumstances. She leaned back in her chair, her expression professional but candid. In my opinion, he's stalling because he's financially unable to proceed with the agreed terms. I nodded, having suspected as much. The home that Travis had once proudly claimed as his smart investment had become an albatross he couldn't carry without my financial support. The foreclosure proceedings had been temporarily halted through an emergency payment Travis had somehow managed, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. I'd like to proceed as scheduled, I decided. But I'm willing to be reasonable about the house. If he can't buy out my portion as agreed, we can list it for sale and divide any proceeds after the mortgage is satisfied. My attorney made notes, her expression suggesting this was the outcome she had anticipated. I'll communicate your position. Given the current real estate market, a quick sale is possible, though you may need to accept less than the original valuation. I understand, I replied, having already calculated the potential financial impact and determined it was acceptable. My new role had come with not only increased responsibility, but also substantial compensation. The loss on the house would be absorbed without significant impact to my long-term financial goals. As we concluded our meeting, my attorney handed me a sealed envelope. This was delivered to our office this morning. It's addressed to you personally, not to you as our client. I recognized Travis's handwriting immediately, the confident strokes that had once signed birthday cards and anniversary notes, now forming my name with an urgency evident in the pressure of the pen. I slipped the envelope into my bag without opening it, thanking my attorney and departing with the composed professionalism that had become my trademark. Only in the privacy of my car did I remove the letter, breaking the seal with steady hands. Laura, it began without preamble. I need to meet with you. Not through attorneys or intermediaries. Just us. One conversation before everything is finalized. I'll be at Riverside Park near the Oak Bench at 6 p.m. today. Please come. Travis. The request was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. As the final divorce hearing approached, Travis's attempts to communicate had increased. Emails I had not answered, voicemails I had deleted after listening. Now this direct appeal bypassing the boundaries I had established. I considered ignoring it as I had the others, maintaining the clear separation that had served me well these past months. Yet something in the simplicity of the request gave me pause. Not demands, not accusations, not manipulation, just a request for conversation. After careful consideration, I decided to go. Not out of lingering attachment or hope for reconciliation, but from a position of strength and closure. I was no longer avoiding Travis out of self-protection. I was simply choosing when and how to engage from a place of personal power. The park was quiet when I arrived. Weekday evening visitors' sparse as summer heat lingered in the air. I spotted Travis immediately, seated on the bench mentioned in his note, his posture uncharacteristically hunched as he stared at the ground. He looked up as I approached, surprise flashing across his features as if he hadn't really expected me to come. The change in his appearance was striking. Weight lost, dark circles beneath his eyes, clothing slightly rumpled in a way the meticulously groomed Travis I had known would never have allowed. "You came," he said, standing awkwardly as I approached. "Yes," I replied simply, remaining standing rather than joining him on the bench. "What did you want to discuss?" Travis gestured vaguely toward the bench. "Could we sit? Just for a few minutes?" I considered, then nodded, taking a seat while maintaining careful distance between us. Travis sat again, his movements suggesting a fatigue that went beyond physical exhaustion. "The house is going into foreclosure," he said without preamble. "I can't make the payments, can't refinance on my own income. The bank won't work with me anymore." I nodded, this information confirming what I had already suspected. "That's why I suggested listing it for sale in the settlement. It won't sell fast enough. There are other issues." He swallowed hard, pride visibly wrestling with necessity. "Credit card debt, a lot of it, and the firm. They've put me on probation. Performance issues." The admission clearly cost him, each word extracted against the gravity of his self-image. The Travis I had married would never have acknowledged such failures, would have maintained the illusion of success regardless of reality. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in his struggles. He looked up sharply, searching my face for sarcasm or triumph. Finding neither, his expression shifted to something more vulnerable than I had ever seen from him. "I need your help, Laura." There it was, the true purpose of this meeting. Not closure, not connection, but necessity. "In what way?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Financially, temporarily." The word seemed to physically pain him. "Just until I can get back on my feet. A loan to stop the foreclosure, maybe some advice on restructuring the other debt." The irony was so profound it almost took my breath away. Travis, who had mocked my financial skills, who had dismissed my careful management as cute, was now explicitly seeking my expertise. Travis, who had called me useless in front of his colleagues, was now acknowledging his dependence on my capabilities. I studied him in the fading evening light, recognizing this moment for what it truly was. Not just a request for help, but the final confrontation between who we had been and who we had become. The ultimate acknowledgement of the reality our marriage had hidden. Travis had always needed me far more than I needed him. "No," I said quietly but firmly. The single word hung between us, its implications expanding to fill the space between what Travis had asked for and what I was willing to give. "Laura, please," he said, desperation edging into his voice. I wouldn't. Ask if there were any other options. It's just until I spent 7 years paying off your debts while you accumulated more. I interrupted, my voice calm but resolute. I spent 7 years having my financial expertise dismissed while secretly using it to keep you afloat. That chapter of my life is closed, Travis. He stared at me, the reality of this final boundary slowly registering. This wasn't negotiable. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. So that's it? He asked, an echo of his question the day I had moved out. After everything we shared, you're just going to watch me drown? I met his gaze directly, neither cruel nor yielding. I'm going to watch you face the natural consequences of your own choices, Travis. Just as I'm facing the positive consequences of mine. Standing, I smoothed my skirt in a gesture that felt like punctuation to our final exchange. I wish you well. I hope you find your way through this, but it won't be with my resources or expertise. As I walked away, Travis called after me once more. Laura, please, I need you. I paused, turning back with the calm certainty that had become my center. No, Travis, you don't need me. You need to become the person I always pretended you were. With those words, I continued down the path, each step carrying me further from the life I had once accepted and closer to the one I had chosen for myself. Behind me sat the consequences of choices long made and support finally withdrawn. Ahead lay only possibility. The final divorce hearing took place on a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly 6 months after Travis had called me useless at that. Fateful dinner. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected the quiet confidence I now carried in every aspect of my life. My attorney met me on the courthouse steps, her briefcase containing all the carefully documented financial records that told the true story of our marriage. Travis's attorney called this morning, she informed me as we walked inside. They're requesting a last-minute modification to the property settlement. What kind of modification? I asked, unsurprised, by yet another attempt to adjust terms at the 11th hour. They want to remove the house entirely from the asset division. Travis is offering to take full responsibility for the mortgage and any resulting foreclosure in exchange for you waiving your right to any equity. I considered this as we passed through security. The proposal was clearly designed to provide Travis relief from his most pressing financial problem while potentially allowing him to salvage something if the real estate market improved. From a purely financial perspective, it was probably in my best interest to agree. The foreclosure proceedings would likely result in minimal equity distribution anyway, and removing my name would protect my credit score from further damage. I'll accept on one condition, I decided. I want written acknowledgement that I've contributed my portion of the mortgage payments throughout our separation, and that Travis has been solely responsible for the default. My attorney nodded approvingly. Smart. That protects you from any future claims and preserves your credit history. I'll draft the language immediately. As we entered the courtroom, I spotted Travis already seated at the opposite table. The contrast between us could not have been more striking. While I projected composed professionalism, Travis appeared disheveled despite obvious attempts to present well. His suit slightly rumpled, his posture tense, dark circles visible beneath his eyes despite his attempt to maintain the confident demeanor that had once come so naturally. Our eyes met briefly across the room. The man who had once looked at me with casual dismissal now watched me with a complex mixture of resentment, regret, and something that might have been respect. I acknowledged him with a small nod before turning my attention to my attorney's preparations. The proceedings themselves were anticlimactic, a formal conclusion to a relationship that had effectively ended months earlier. The judge reviewed our settlement agreement, noted the last-minute modification regarding the house, and confirmed that both parties understood the terms. When asked if I agreed to the settlement, I responded with a clear, steady, "Yes, Your Honor," my voice betraying none of the emotion that might have been expected at this final dissolution of 7 years of marriage. It was only as we prepared to leave that the full reversal of our dynamics became apparent. While I gathered my belongings with efficient calm, Travis approached hesitantly, his attorney hovering nearby with poorly concealed concern. "Laura," he said, his voice pitched low to avoid being overheard. "Can we speak privately for a moment?" I glanced at my attorney, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. I nodded, indicating it was acceptable. "I'll meet you outside," I told her, waiting until she had left before turning back to Travis. He seemed to struggle with what to say, now that he had my attention. I need to ask." "Yes?" I prompted, maintaining the professional distance that now characterized our interactions. He exhaled sharply, pride visibly wrestling with necessity. "The Prestons are hosting their annual holiday dinner next month. Marcus has indicated my continued presence at these events is professionally important." I waited, recognizing there was more to this awkward explanation. "The thing is," Travis continued, his voice strained, "there have been questions about the divorce, about the financial issues. My professional standing has been affected." Understanding dawned. "And you're concerned about how I might represent our separation to our shared social circle." Relief flickered across his features at my quick comprehension. "Yes, exactly. If you could just not mention certain details about the house, about the financial situation." The request laid bare the complete reversal of our positions. Travis, who had once casually dismissed me in front of the very people whose opinion he valued, was now essentially asking me to protect his reputation among them. The man who had called me useless was acknowledging my power to significantly impact his remaining professional standing with a few truthful words. I considered him carefully, noting the anxiety behind his attempted composure. This was not the confident Travis who had once commanded rooms with effortless charm. This was someone grappling with the consequences of years of financial mismanagement and personal misconduct, now dependent on the discretion of the very person he had undervalued. "I have no intention of discussing our financial arrangements with anyone, Travis," I said finally. "That would reflect poorly on both of us." Relief visibly washed over him. "Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask." I gathered my purse, preparing to leave, then paused. "But I won't lie if directly asked." His expression faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if someone like Marcus or Bethany explicitly asks me about what happened between us, I will be truthful, not vindictive, but honest. I don't owe you a manufactured narrative anymore." Travis processed this, calculation visible in his expression as he weighed the conditional nature of my assurance. "That's fair," he conceded finally. As I turned to leave, he called after me one more time. "Laura?" I paused, looking back with a raised eyebrow. "You're doing well, aren't you? With the promotion, the new place. You seem different." The observation carried a note of genuine realization, as if Travis was finally seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. "I am different," I acknowledged. "Or rather, I'm who I always was beneath the version of myself I thought our marriage required." He nodded slowly, something like understanding flickering in his eyes. "For what it's worth, I was wrong. What I said that night at dinner. You were never useless. I just didn't value what you contributed." The acknowledgement, something close to an actual apology, was unexpected. I allowed myself to truly look at Travis, seeing beyond my ex-husband to the flawed human being struggling with the collapse of his carefully constructed self-image. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, genuine despite everything that had transpired between us. "I hope you find your footing, Travis." As I walked away, my heels echoing on the courthouse marble, I felt the final shift in our dynamic solidify. I was no longer the supportive wife waiting on Travis's approval, no longer the financial manager invisibly maintaining his lifestyle. no longer the emotional caretaker anticipating and accommodating his needs. I was simply Laura, financial director, independent woman, author of my own life. And Travis was now just a chapter in my story rather than its defining narrative. Outside, my attorney waited beside her car. "Everything okay?" she asked as I approached. "Yes," I said, smiling slightly. "Everything is exactly as it should be." We drove to my office where I had insisted on working a half day despite the significance of the morning's events. As I settled, at my desk, reviewing the quarterly projections my team had prepared, my assistant appeared with coffee and a small gift bag. "The team wanted to acknowledge today," she explained, setting both on my desk. "We know it's been a challenging period personally, though you've never let it affect your work." Inside the bag was a small silver paperweight engraved with a simple message, "Your worth is immeasurable." The gesture, recognition not just of what I had overcome but of what I brought to my professional role, brought unexpected emotion to the surface. These colleagues, who knew nothing of the financial machinations or emotional complexities of my marriage, had seen my value clearly despite my brief tenure in the director position. "Please thank everyone for me," I said, composing myself quickly. "It means a great deal." As my assistant left, I placed the paperweight prominently on my desk, a small but significant marker of the new reality I had created. From a marriage where my worth had been consistently diminished to a professional environment where it was recognized and celebrated. From financial entanglement with someone who mismanaged resources to complete independence and control over my own assets. From emotional caretaking of a partner who took without reciprocation to healthy, balanced relationships with colleagues and friends. The reversal wasn't just in how Travis and I related to each other in our final interactions. It was in how I related to myself, no longer through the distorting lens of his expectations and judgments, but directly, clearly, and with complete ownership of my own value. That evening, as I left the office, I passed the conference room where I had first demonstrated my financial strategy for the Davidson portfolio, the presentation that had cemented my promotion. Through the glass, I could see another team working late, the energy of focused collaboration evident even from a distance. I paused, momentarily reflecting on the parallel universe where I might still be rushing home to prepare Travis's dinner, still accommodating his schedule, still managing his messes while he called me useless to anyone who would listen. The contrast between that theoretical life and my current reality couldn't have been more stark, or more affirming. 1 year after leaving Travis, I stood in my newly purchased condominium, watching the sunrise paint golden light across the living room. Unlike the apartment I had initially rented, a transitional space chosen primarily for convenience, this home reflected deliberate choices made entirely for myself. Clean modern lines balanced with warm textures. A dedicated home office overlooking the city. A kitchen designed for someone who genuinely enjoyed cooking rather than performed it as an obligatory service. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Financial workshop, Women's Center, 10 a.m. I smiled, anticipating the session with a mixture of purpose and satisfaction. What had begun as my participation in a support group during my divorce had evolved into something more meaningful. I now led monthly financial literacy workshops for women in transitional life phases, many emerging from relationships where financial control had been a form of subjugation. This integration of my professional expertise with my personal experience had become one of the most unexpected and rewarding aspects of my post-Travis life. The skills I had once used to manage his financial chaos now served to empower others facing similar situations. As I prepared for the day, I moved through my morning routine with a mindfulness that had once been impossible. The constant demands of managing Travis's needs alongside my own had previously transformed even simple self-care into rushed efficiency. Now, each action carried intention, from preparing my coffee exactly as I preferred it to selecting an outfit that expressed my professional confidence rather than conforming to someone else's expectations. The workshop space at the Women's Center buzzed with nervous energy as participants arrived. I recognized the expressions many wore: uncertainty mixed with determination, the tentative emergence of women beginning to reclaim their agency after years of diminishment. I had worn that same expression myself not so long ago. "Welcome," I began once everyone had settled. "I'm Laura, and I'm here to share some practical financial strategies for those navigating significant life transitions. But before we dive into the technical aspects, I want to acknowledge something important. Financial independence isn't just about numbers. It's about recognizing your own worth and making choices that honor that worth." The words weren't part of my prepared outline, but they flowed naturally from the integration of my professional knowledge and personal journey. As I continued, moving between practical advice on credit rebuilding and deeper insights about the emotional dimensions of financial empowerment, I watched understanding dawn in various expressions around the room. "The most important thing I've learned," I shared as we neared the end of the session, "is that financial health isn't separate from emotional health. They're interconnected. When we allow others to diminish our sense of value in one area, it often affects how we advocate for ourselves in all areas." A woman in the front row, Jessica, who had shared earlier about leaving a 15-year marriage where her husband had controlled all financial decisions, raised her hand. "How did you know when it was time?" she asked, the question simple but laden with complexity. "To leave, I mean. To stop trying to make it work." The room quieted, participants leaning slightly forward, recognizing the question as central to many of their own struggles. I considered carefully before responding, honoring the seriousness of what she was really asking. "For me," I began, "it wasn't a single moment but a gradual awakening. I realized I was investing enormous energy maintaining an illusion. The illusion that my marriage was balanced, that my contributions were valued, that the diminishment I experienced was somehow normal or acceptable." I paused, finding the precise words to articulate what had been a complex internal shift. The turning point came when I finally understood that the person I had become in my marriage was a reduced version of myself. I was making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's need to feel larger. And once I saw that pattern clearly, continuing it became impossible. Jessica nodded slowly, recognition evident in her expression. Others in the room showed similar responses, the quiet acknowledgement of seeing their own experiences reflected in different circumstances. "The practical steps came after that realization," I continued. "Documentation, planning, strategic decisions about timing and resources. But the essential first step was internal, recognizing my own worth independent of how someone else valued me." After the workshop concluded, several women lingered, asking additional questions or simply sharing parts of their stories. This, too, had become a familiar pattern, the workshop serving not just as financial education, but as confirmation that their experiences were neither unique nor imagined. As I gathered my materials, Marlene appeared in the doorway, surprising me. We had developed a genuine friendship over the past year, occasionally meeting for lunch or after-work drinks, but she had never attended one of my workshops before. "Hope you don't mind me dropping in," she said, helping me collect handouts. "I was curious about this side project you're so passionate about." "Not at all," I replied, though it's a bit different from our usual client presentations. Marlene nodded, watching the last participants exit in animated conversation. "I can see why you do it. That was powerful, Laura. The way you connected the financial strategies to the deeper issues." We walked together toward the exit, Marlene thoughtful before speaking again. "You know, watching you in there reminded me of something I've been meaning to tell you. The board is creating a new position, Chief Financial Wellness Officer. It's a client-facing role focused on holistic financial health rather than just investment returns. Your name came up in the preliminary discussions." I absorbed this information with measured surprise. That sounds fascinating. A more integrated approach to client services. Exactly, Marlene confirmed. And after seeing you today, I'm even more convinced you'd be perfect for it. You've developed something valuable through your own experience, the ability to connect technical expertise with emotional intelligence. The observation struck me with its accuracy. What I had once considered my greatest vulnerability, the painful dismantling of my marriage and identity, had actually become the foundation for a deeper understanding of both finance and human behavior. The lessons I had integrated from that experience weren't just personal healing, but professional wisdom. I'd be interested in learning more, I acknowledged, genuinely intrigued by the possibility. As we parted ways outside the center, I decided to walk home rather than taking a cab, using the time to reflect on how completely my perspective had transformed in a single year. The skills I had once used to manage Travis's financial chaos while receiving mockery in return had become recognized professional assets. The emotional intelligence I had developed navigating his dismissal of my worth was now valued by colleagues and clients alike. Even more significantly, I had integrated these external validations into a solid internal foundation. Unlike during my marriage, when I had desperately sought Travis's approval while receiving his criticism, I now recognized affirmation from others as confirmation of what I already knew about myself, rather than the source of my self-worth. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Bethany Preston. We had maintained sporadic contact since my divorce, primarily through professional channels. But this message was more personal. Laura, I wanted to share some news that might interest you. Travis is leaving the firm at the end of the month. Marcus tried to work with him through the performance issues, but ultimately it wasn't salvageable. I'm telling you this not to dwell on the past, but because I've always respected how you've handled everything with such dignity. Would you be available for lunch next week? I'd love to catch up properly. I read the message twice, surprised by my own reaction. Not satisfaction at Travis's professional downfall, but a quiet acknowledgement of how predictable this outcome had become once the scaffolding of my support had been removed. Without someone managing his schedule, catching his errors, supplementing his financial shortfalls, and maintaining his image, the facade had finally collapsed completely. As I composed a polite acceptance of Bethany's lunch invitation, I realized this final news about Travis represented the full integration of the lessons my marriage had taught me. I could acknowledge the reality of who he was and the dynamic we had shared without either bitterness or nostalgia. I could recognize the harm his dismissal had caused without allowing it to define my ongoing story. Most importantly, I had learned to distinguish between genuine value and assigned worth, between what I actually contributed to any relationship, professional or personal, and how that contribution might be perceived or acknowledged by others. These integrated lessons hadn't just changed how I related to my past with Travis. They had transformed how I approached every aspect of my present and future. Financial decisions made with clear-eyed assessment rather than emotional compensation. Professional contributions offered with confident expertise rather than apologetic deference. Personal boundaries established with calm certainty rather than defensive justification. The woman who had once been called useless while secretly managing her husband's financial chaos had become someone whose value was recognized, whose expertise was sought after, and most importantly, whose worth was no longer dependent on external validation. The lessons had been painful, the integration transformative. Sometimes I think about that night, standing frozen in the kitchen as my husband's voice carried from the dining room, calling me useless, while I had just finished analyzing the very financial documents that showed I'd paid off nearly $90,000 of his premarital debt. I think about the woman I was then, capable but diminished, competent but unseen, valuable but unvalued. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, I want to speak directly to you now. When someone dismisses your worth, whether through casual mockery, deliberate belittlement, or simple indifference to your contributions. They aren't describing you. They're revealing themselves. They're showing you exactly who they are and how they view relationships. The most insidious part of being with someone who diminishes you isn't the hurt of their words or actions. It's how, over time, you begin to internalize their perception. You start to question your own value. You begin making yourself smaller to accommodate their need to feel larger. You accept less because you've been convinced you deserve less. Spent 7 years managing my husband's finances while he called me cute for keeping spreadsheets. 7 years covering his mistakes while he presented himself as the financial expert. 7 years shrinking myself to maintain his illusion of superiority. The journey from that kitchen moment to where I stand today wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about reclamation of my time, my energy, my expertise, and most fundamentally, my sense of self-worth. If your partner consistently makes you feel inadequate, incompetent, or invisible, that isn't love. Love doesn't diminish, it elevates. Love doesn't mock, it respects. Love doesn't take what you offer for granted. It recognizes and reciprocates your contributions. Standing up to a dismissive or verbally abusive partner isn't selfish. It isn't an overreaction to just words or harmless jokes. It's an act of self-preservation. It's saying, I matter enough not to accept being treated as if I don't matter. The most powerful thing I learned through my experience wasn't how to leave a bad marriage. It was how to recognize my own worth independently of anyone else's assessment. It was understanding that I don't need someone else's validation to know my own value. When I stopped trying to prove my worth to someone who couldn't or wouldn't see it, I discovered something transformative. I had been the source of my own strength all along. My financial expertise didn't suddenly become valuable when my employers recognized it. It had always been valuable, regardless of Travis's dismissal. My capacity for organization and management didn't become significant only when its absence created chaos in Travis's life. It had always been significant, even when taken for granted. If someone in your life is telling you you're useless, worthless, or insignificant, whether through direct words or subtle implications, please hear this. They are wrong. Not subjectively. Wrong, but objectively incorrect about your fundamental value as a human being. The question isn't whether you should stay or leave, fight back, or remain silent. The question is, what would your life look like if you honored your own worth as the starting point for every decision you make? For me, that question led to independence, professional advancement, and genuine connections built on mutual respect, rather than one-sided accommodation. It led to mornings where I wake up in a home designed for my comfort, to work that values my unique perspective, to relationships that enhance rather than diminish my sense of self. Your path might look different, but it begins with the same recognition that you deserve to be valued, not despite who you are, but because of who you are. The person who calls you useless while benefiting from your contributions doesn't get to define your story. Only you have that power and your true worth. It was never in question. It was only waiting for you to recognize it yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.